Chapter 1. Colin and the Curious Crowd. A small ray of light peeked through a narrow opening in the drapes and shined onto the bed, then slowly trickled up the covers, where a figure underneath stirred. Eyes starting awake, looked ahead to the clock and adjusted, reading the digits before a man unsteadily rose up onto his elbows. He drowsily considered his surroundings, reminded of all the effort it took to unload the U-Haul yesterday evening as his muscles ached and he observed the piles of boxes. They cluttered the hardwood floor along with a few furniture items that sat near the bathroom entrance. With a distressed sigh, he climbed out of bed and sidestepped the unpacked containers to get himself ready for the day. Colin Stoddard had recently relocated to Indiana and moved to the quaint town of Posey. There, he's rented a 2-bedroom house only a few miles shy of Main Street. The price seemed reasonable considering the number of tenants it had had in the past, and in need of a fresh start, he's also taken a job as Deli Clerk at Chip's Corner Deli. He hoped a more mundane routine would afford him the time to sort out what he wants to make of his life. Though it seemed impractical, being in his early 40s and starting over, he craved the peace and quiet such a small town offered. After a quick shower, he dressed himself according to work standards, in pressed black pants and a white smock tailored to suit his husky form, then examined himself in the mirror. Tired, olive-green eyes stared back at his cherubic features. Not an unattractive man, or classically handsome, but inexplicably appealing. He took a deep breath and curled his thin lips to force a smile. Nevertheless, it's quickly replaced with melancholy. "You can do this," he affirmed unconvincingly, then evened out the name tag above his left pocket. It was 9:30 as he made his way down the corridor, confirming he had his keys and cell phone when he reached the front door. Chip's is less than 5 miles from his new home on Mulberry Street, so there's plenty of time, but Colin planned to arrive at least 15 minutes early to make a good impression. As he stepped outside, turned the lock, and closed the door behind him, he appreciated the particularly breezy Monday morning and then noticed his next-door neighbor, who carried a bag of kibble from the porch into the backyard, where 2 eager dogs came racing toward her and surrounded. Several yards apart, with a 4-foot fence separating their lawn, he finds himself drifting closer to get a better look. He'd spent 2 nights there, and has thus far only spoken to the manager from work and his landlord, although he'd seen the incredible 2-story house left of his, and curiously watched for a moment. In spite of the distance, he presumed the woman to be young, based on her attire of tattered skinny jeans and the black wife-beater that hugged her form. It would have been difficult for any unsuspecting man not to regard. But as he approached the chain-link fence, he was struck by the way her fair complexion deepened her eyes and contrasted the peach hue of her lips. She wore long, dark hair around her shoulders that caught in the wind as she set down the food and knelt to lavish affection on her Labradors. They yipped in response to her banter and licked the palms of her hands as she pet them with a warm smile. A spark caused the groggy, unprepared feelings that were troubling Colin to disappear for an instant while he considered their inevitable meeting. She briefly turned her attention towards him before tending to the animals again, and he couldn't discern a reaction, but all too soon reminded himself of the time and went to the car, just missing her second glance which saw him leaving for work, and she asked herself, compared to the other residents, how long he'd stay. The roadway was bizarrely uninhabited, where his was the sole vehicle heading through Main Street. Scenery was dreary and contradicted the pleasant weather while he passed shop after shop. Each one looked self-established and run by locals, exactly what you'd expect of a small town. He spotted the tacky green building ahead by its sizable logo stretching over the concrete lot with the words Chip's Corner Deli in fading red letters. Evidently it stood there for a number of years without any repairs to its washed-out paint job and flickering bulbs that only lit half the sign. His car pulled in alongside a blue, beat-up Oldsmobile in an otherwise vacant parking lot, and he wondered if he'd arrived too early. But it was 10:15. He stared curiously at the digital clock inside the car before he shut it off and stepped out. The hours posted on the door read 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Could it just be me and the manager today, he thought, surprised by the shopkeeper's bell that rang off-key when he entered. A high-toned, nervy voice abruptly called out, "Hey, you!" and immediately he turned his attention to someone drawing close from the grocery aisles. This short, wiry individual carried a red crate full of produce and met him at the door. "Spring sale," he blurted earnestly. "Whole cuts, fresh, at 25% off." Colin observed the store badge pinned to the other's identical white smock and read the name Wade, who obviously hadn't made the connection between them. When he started to introduce himself, another loudly interjected, "He's one of us, you bonehead. Check the uniform." Up from behind the register stood a man, most notable by his inky hair that spiked into a mohawk. He swung his legs across the countertop like a rag doll and rushed to join them. "They call me Dax," he then motioned to his co-worker, "and this odd duck, his name's Wade." With a forced, polite expression, he replied, "Colin," then extended his hand to Dax, who retorted by pointing his fingers in the shape of an L at the new employer's badge with a quick wink and tongue-clicking sound. "Obviously, well, not obvious to some," he teased. "I didn't realize," Wade sheepishly lowered his shoulders. "Nothing gets by this guy," he quipped, and resumed small talk. "You're the rookie Alan told us about." All the while he grinned ear to ear as if privy to an inside joke at Colin's expense. His teeth were perfectly straight but stained a dark blue-green, the way teeth might appear after taking in a colorful treat. "City life to small-town boy like that," Dax snapped his fingers, and Wade chirped, "He's no boy." "When he's right, he replied, and talked fast, running words together without pause in a self-satisfied manner that exaggerated intensity. He threw an arm over his skimpy associate, only affirming how much taller he was, also equally gangly. He then persisted. "Traveled far and wide to dabble with experts in a respective field of sales. I hope you're not a vegetarian." Colin hesitated briefly and answered, "Oh no." Out of nowhere, Wade enthusiastically sang out, "Ding, ding, ding, ding," which caused Colin to involuntarily shudder from the sudden boisterous gesture. He breathed deep, vaguely agitated, as Dax vaulted to his side and clapped. "Cool. You're green, but we'll school ya." Mildly uncomfortable and striving to hide it, he scanned the market and found it as empty as the rest of the neighborhood. The place had been open for 2 hours, so Colin asked, "Is it always this quiet in the morning?" Dax's eyes widened with amusement when he deduced the English accent, completely ignoring the question and overstating his interest. "I thought you were from Springfield, Missouri." "I am," Colin answered succinctly, however certain it would not suffice. The others paused, awaiting a clearer explanation, no matter how obvious. "Originally from England," he added, desperate to avoid further details about himself. Wade snickered, his gaunt face beaming to reveal a similar discoloration of his teeth that was perturbing as he spoke in a wavering pitch. "All kinds welcome here, long as they eat meat." Both of them gawked at him. He strained a hushed laugh deep in his throat, and Dax patted him on the back. "After all, where would we be without the customer?" he enthused, and Colin nodded along stiffly as they closed in and stood in a huddle. "Around here, we make sure everybody gets enough protein in their diet," Dax boasted. "It's not just about the cuts of beef or poultry, good as they are." Wade shook his head and chimed in, "Delicious." The other smirked in total agreement. "Of course, but it's a mixture, you see. If you can't deliver that smooth well," he chuckled, "you're in the wrong business." Then put a hand on Colin's shoulder and leaned in. "Not everyone who walks through that door," he pointed out, "comes in with brisket on the brain." His grip tightened as he peered over Main Street through an expansive shop window. "We get tourists passing through, a few regulars, and your occasional drifter wandering in with a craving for booze, snacks, or maybe fresh produce." He deferred to make sure their newcomer listened. Then he informed, "But meat, that's our bread and butter. It's what we specialize in." His excitement rose. "That's what we sell. More importantly, how we stay in business." Once finished, their eyes met, and Dax asked, "You get me?" He tried to remain sociable, though drained by the awkward conversation and its aggressive nature. Colin mustered a, "Definitely, yeah." "That's a proper answer from a proper fellow." Dax poorly mimicked a British accent, loosened his grasp, and let go. In spite of the playful impression, intent seemed to blur the lines between fun and offense. Colin wasn't entirely sure which, but knew well enough to disregard it as banter. He gave a faint smile and attempted to change the subject. "Is Alan in yet? I should probably see him about getting set up here, but it wouldn't be so easy to excuse himself." "He's not here," Wade replied flatly, during which time Colin noticed an ever-so-slight twitch occur on the right side of his face. It was difficult to unsee once recognized, and continued to spasm while he talked. "We'll show you the ropes. Don't worry." "I'm sure you both know your way around," he started, "but I think he wanted to go over a few things with me personally, and he is the manager." Dax rested a hand under his chin and shook his head. "Right. Okay. 'Cept he's left us in charge here this morning." His counterpart shrugged, that repeated twitch pinching his looks and curling underneath the eye. "Oh." Colin was surprised, a little puzzled since he'd only just met with Alan 2 days prior, and he didn't say anything about not being there his first day. Well, not that thrilled with the prospect of spending additional time with either of them. He wasn't sure how to respond. "Do you know if he'll be at work tomorrow?" "Chillax," Dax insisted. "Alan trusts us. Ain't that right, Wade?" He answered, "I'm the one had your uniform made special." Wade clumsily set down the crate of vegetables he was carrying and stepped over them. "Boss gave me your measurements and I had Sally down at Triple Stitch fix you up with an extra large," he said proudly and inched into Colin's personal space. "We don't make 'em big. Never had a burly fellow work here." "Extra large fits more comfortably when you're working," Colin added, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "It's just large for regular clothes," he clarified, widening the gap between him and Wade. However, Dax defended his friend. "You can't blame him. I mean, look at us both," he remarked in reference to their lanky appearance. "You're what, 170, 180 pounds? Visibly uncomfortable with the question, he fumbled for a response, trying to keep his guard up. "That's quite a lot, actually," Dax interrupted. "Sorry, my bad. You go by stones in Britain." "Yeah," his gaze avoided theirs. "I couldn't say." But the tactless ribbing continued. "I'll bet you never miss a meal," Wade sniggered. "To be fair, though, your height makes you look plump. I'm almost 6 feet tall." "Lean as a rail," Dax cackled, then reiterated. "If you add a couple inches, you'd be a regular heavy-duty man. Even you right out." Wade joined in with the laughs. A mixture of insecurities and animosity stirred, while Colin maintained his silence during their childish laughter. He wasn't going to start a problem that might make things harder down the road. Truthfully, he wouldn't have regardless, when an all-too-familiar feeling of running away sunk in. For whatever reason, the amusement ceased, and Dax shifted topics. "So, is this it? Are you moving here for good?" Not even Colin was sure of that, and the inquiry felt as though it had more than one meaning. "Shouldn't we be doing some work?" he asked, dodging the issue, and Wade smirked. Plenty of time for that. The two seemed perfectly satisfied interrogating him relentlessly amid his shift, until a third employee emerged from the back room and walked around the checkout counter. Petite, though athletically built, stood a bleach blonde. Her characteristics were slightly masculine, and she had a boyish haircut swept to one side. She stalled when she saw them all grouping near the entrance, and cocked her head, looking particularly cross with her partners. "Am I gonna haul our new inventory onto the dollies all by myself?" Her soft baritone voice hinted sarcasm, while she paused for their response. "No, ma'am," Wade volunteered, as if any answer could have been adequate, and Dax nudged him for sucking up so fast, but followed suit. "Whatever you say, darlin'." As she approached, she asserted, "I'll handle this," an indication they better get a move on, and Colin was relieved. She slyly grinned. "We have to restock the meat displays before 11. You want to get on that?" "Done, done, and done, Lexi," Dax sneered like some know-it-all. Nevertheless, he let it be. However, seconds later sprinted past the aisles with an obnoxious howl that demanded their attention. They watched him leap over the counter, muttering things inaudibly to Wade, who chuckled along, their noise disappearing with them in the background. And then, after a moment, she sighed. "Sorry. They can be a handful sometimes." "Very animated," he said and exhaled, making an effort to mask his dislike, except she saw right through it. "That's a positive spin." She put her hand out to shake his, and he seemed thrown at first, but shook it. She guessed the others weren't as cordial. "I'm Lexi." "Colin," he replied, still acting cautious, not knowing what to expect next. Lexi just smiled. "Well, Colin," she nodded her head, "Dax can be a high-strung asshole, and Wade, kinda creepy." However true the candid comments left him speechless, and wearing a befuddled expression. She resumed, A serial killer-esque vibe. Of course, they can't help it. Neither one is very self-aware. Did they? She paused to glance over her shoulder toward the back room, then at Colin. Did they bother you? Yes, he thought, but replied indirectly. No, it's fine. That's okay, she assured him, and paid no mind to his endeavors to hide the truth. It appeared rather genuine on her part and somehow put him at ease. It can be tiresome, but they're good guys. I know. He relaxed his nerves for the time being. Thanks. No problem. Lexi began to walk and signaled him to join her. Alan had a few kinks to work out in his own time, so I'm going to get you started. Okay, he replied as she led him to a corner behind the counter where a stainless steel table filled the space with a shining silver device and scale beside it. Lexi turned to him. Have you ever used a commercial meat slicer before? I can't say that I have. So she stepped aside for him to get a better look. This model is manual, not automatic, she explained, and wrapped her fingers around the flexi-coated grip. The ham, turkey, whatever goes here, she pointed to the rectangular carriage attached to the machine, about to teach him the basics when the store bell jingled and cut her short as a female customer appeared. Morning, she called out, not recognizing the woman was on her cell phone, who returned the greeting with a dirty look. Excuse me 1 sec, Lexi said, and went to assist the sour patron nearing the register. He watched their exchange like a scene from reality television, with a shrill, middle-aged beatnik playing the stereotype of rude clientele to a T, talking incessantly over the phone while she described a kind of chuck roast to Lexi that she claimed to need in a hurry, although she delayed their communication every minute she took to explain what was going on with whomever she was speaking. Eventually it was determined the cut and sort of beef she so ineptly detailed just as she hung up. Lexi managed to smile. These whole cuts happen to be part of our spring sale. Sale? She squawked, like she was being insulted. That's right. 11 pounds of this rib roast gets you another 2 pounds free. Her tightly stretched frown melted almost instantly. My, she chortled, and he wondered how someone as short-fused and verbose could turn on a dime. The nerve it takes. Colin, hand me that pre-wrapped 13-pound cross rib roast under the glass. Lexi waved at the food display in front of him. Jostled from his thoughts, he inspected the stacks of meat in series, pre-cut and firmly packaged in brown paper wrap. They were stamped with Chip's mark and labeled with a sticker next to it that had the name and type of cold cut. Once he found it, he picked it out among the few left and walked it over. He wasn't too impressed with the woman's phony attitude change as he handed off her goods and surveilled Lexi ring it up. Thank you kindly, miss, she professed. Her stilted expression pulling the wrinkles from her leathery orange skin made his crawl. He couldn't stand fake people like that. At his previous job, he never would have crossed paths with anybody that way. But Lexi, she was friendly right back. Have a good day. That's when Colin realized this place was going to be a lot different than what he was used to, and he'd have to train himself for these kinds of situations. Probably regularly. His eyes followed her out the door and trailed down where he caught a glimpse of something dark, trickles of black that stained his hands. It was comparable to ink in color, but upon closer inspection there was an oily quality to it, a thickness that dried up and faded. She noticed he was puzzled. Come on, wash your hands, she suggested, and I'll finish showing you our equipment before things get busy. But Colin seemed to hesitate as Lexi tilted her head in the direction of their sink and led the way. It was out of sight from those who might wander in and ordinarily used to clean carving utensils and machines, among other things. He turned the faucet on while she dug into a nearby drawer and found him a pair of gloves. It's less messy if you use these, she advised, coming up from behind, lightly nudging him on the back. After drying his hands on a dampened wash rag, he turned around and took the pair of disposable gloves. It's the spices and seasoning we use in most of the wholesale meats, she offered as an excuse to how he'd soiled the skin. Gets mixed in with the juices, a lot of times into your clothes. Then Lexi started walking back to the meat slicer. We're individually responsible for keeping the uniforms clean. He stayed close and listened carefully. They returned to the same corner as before. Now let's run through this, she said, beginning with that machine. Going over safety measures, how to size each slice, and weigh it by the pound, which came easily to him. Other tasks were equally as simple. Colin had always been an adept learner and operated effectively for many years in his prior workplace. That required more of an analytical approach, and even served him greater in the hands-on environment. However meager, there were a variety of duties that included heavy lifting, itemization, and getting dirty. Gradually, he'd alternate with the rest of them. For now, he primarily observed and manned the register. Once the freezers had been loaded, Dax and Wade brought out fresh meat that needed chopping, some slicing, and of course, wrapping for the displays. As store traffic picked up, he participated minimally in cutting and seasoning. Time Dax resolved to show off his experience and make things unnecessarily hectic and especially bothersome. Perhaps the most frustrating instance came when an elderly, chunky sort of fellow purchased close to 50 pounds of ground beef in their spring sale, and Wade leered at him, grinding up the extra beef, peeking over his shoulder with that unrelenting twitch while he and Dax traded childish glances, bloating their cheeks to imitate the man's pudgy face. They would knowingly look to Colin, anticipating some response, and they acted like he was in on the gag, though it was obvious to him he was the butt of the joke, and he didn't want to give them the satisfaction of letting it upset him. So again, he said nothing and carried on. It still irked him how freely they made things personal and deemed such behavior all right. In this way, they succeeded. By the evening time, business had slowed considerably, and it was almost 6 o'clock, the end of Colin's shift, at which point Lexi relieved him and took over the role of counter clerk. Then reassured, "You did good today," causing a warm smile to pervade him as she removed a stool from beneath the counter to lounge on. He was grateful for the way she treated him, when the others tended to be unfairly cruel. "Are you sure you don't need any more help?" he offered, surprising himself that he'd rather stay and work instead of face a strange bed alone. But she declined. "We'll take it from here. Go on home." With merely 2 hours left till closing, Wade started the initial cleanup and broomed the floors, while Dax sanitized the machines and washed the cutlery. The place fell shockingly silent, as it was when he'd arrived and now headed out. Home. Somewhere that hadn't earned that title or inherited its familiarity. Yet on his way through the door, he heard footsteps clamoring after him, accompanied by Dax calling, "Hey! Heavy duty! Wait!" Colin paused, then turned, his expression flat, giving the impression that he did not approve of his newly coined nickname. That mattered little to Dax, who thrived in uncomfortable situations. "Nobody's got time for your antics," Lexi declared. "We've got to finish up here," though her reminders wouldn't dissuade him. "1 second," he replied. "I've got something for our co-worker." Dax grinned and handed him a neatly bundled package of strip steak. A brief period elapsed before Colin reacted. "Oh, thank you," he fumbled to sound sincere. "This is, I'm sure it's good," uncertain what angle he may be playing at. Dax reached out and tapped the wrapping with his index finger. "This stuff will melt in your mouth," he said unnervingly. Colin looked to Lexi in hopes of breaking the bizarre tension that gathered and reaffirm his skepticism. Only she stared right at him, with a lingering stillness, as if to see past him, through him, to the doorway he stood in front of. It instantly gave him an eerie feeling he was incapable of shaking, one that left a grown man speechless and uneasy during the daytime, especially when he noticed Wade from the corner of his eye had stopped sweeping to watch him and said, "See you tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow," Colin replied nervously, without understanding why, then made a swift exit, all of a sudden anxious to get home as he crossed the empty parking lot and got into his car, the only one, besides their Oldsmobile, yet again. The area was unusually deserted, no more crowded than 8 hours earlier. Is it always like this, he wondered, and tossed the meat in the seats behind him, then started the vehicle. As he pulled away from Chip's, he thought he saw the blurred figures of his co-workers at the windows, but he didn't look back and told himself things would get better, that his questions would be answered, and tomorrow he'd be rid of the unexplainable doubt that haunted him. He was very wrong.